Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on 5 effective strategies for optimizing data infrastructure costs. I'm Sid Lasley, the Vice President of Sales Engineering here at Hevo Data. I'm also your host today. Our focus today is to provide actionable insights on managing data infrastructure expenses across multiple cloud services and aligning those cloud spending with your actual business objectives to drive measurable value and growth. I'm very fortunate to have a special guest speaker with me today. His name is Sonny Rivera. Sonny is the Chief Product Officer of Tifin AG. He's also a Snowflake data superhero. And another superpower he has is helping organizations optimize their data infrastructure for both performance and cost efficiency. Sonny, is there anything you'd like to share beyond that with our audience?
Well, yeah, first of all, Sid, thanks for having me. I really appreciate you having me on. I'm excited to talk about this. This is one of the things that's near and dear to my heart. So understanding cost and optimizing that cost, that's something I do a good bit of. My name's Sonny Rivera. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Tifin AG. Tifin AG is a fintech company that uses AI and ML to help the wealth industry grow their client access to wealth management. So we're really looking to help improve wealth outcomes for everybody with wealth advisement. So that's what we do. I've been in the data industry for, 25 plus years, and most recently helping companies from a data strategy perspective, whether that's a data leader all the way down to data architects, on how do you optimize costs and how do you get the most out of your data platform. And like you said, I'm a Snowflake data superhero. Love that team, and a lot of great input from them has helped me build out strategies for our data platforms.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sonny. Let's dive into our topics for today. So for our agenda today, we're going to take a look at what good looks like from a cost management perspective. What mindset would you bring to the table to be able to manage that? And then Sonny will dive into 5 distinct strategies you can use to tackle data infrastructure costs. I'll jump in towards the end of the presentation, give you some insight on tips and tricks for saving costs on your data integration costs. And we will have a Q&A session at the end. So if you do have any questions, please input them into the webinar. You are all on mute at the moment, but if you input your questions into the Q&A panel, we'll be glad to answer those at the end. So with that said, I thought we'd start with this topic, Sonny, and this is really from your own personal experience of managing expenses related to cloud data warehouses. What are some of the key factors organizations should consider when they're taking this journey towards, as you'll describe, a FinOps journey to managing their data infrastructure costs?
Yeah, I think, first of all, as we've got these listed here, and I'll talk a little bit about those. The first thing I wanted to talk about was a little bit about the mindset of managing your cloud data infrastructure, which, some of us have grown up in the cloud, right? There's a whole cohort of folks that have only grown up with cloud infrastructure, and so maybe that's all that they know and that it's native to them. Others of us have migrated from on-premise to the cloud, and that process continues to happen. The challenge is if you go about managing your cloud infrastructure with the mindset of how you managed your on-premise infrastructure. And so it's important to make sure that you're thinking about, how is the cloud different? How do I manage consumption? How do I manage cost? Because in this world, in the cloud world, we have virtually unlimited compute, virtually unlimited performance that we can get to. And that can also lead to high cost. So if you're not thinking about those 3 things together and how they work well together, you can end up in some trouble. So that's the first thing I would say. Change your mindset and make sure you're thinking as a cloud-first mindset. I'm sure you guys at Hevo have seen that as well. So the very first thing I would say is visibility. You've got to have a framework for having visibility into your performance of your platform, whether you're talking about AWS or Google Cloud, or if you're talking about Snowflake. You need to have that granular cost visibility. What services are costing you the most, and what's the usage that you have out of that? A big watch out here I see is individuals go, oh, my cloud cost is a little bit high, and they jump right into optimization, right? And I would say first thing to do is get the visibility. If you get that visibility, you'll know where to then optimize. So that's kind of the first point. The second one is around making sure that you're deploying your compute and storage and you're implementing those best practices. And that leads to the optimization that we're talking about. And if your processes aren't optimized now would be the time to start looking at optimizing them. Have the visibility, then start to optimize the ones that are causing the biggest challenge. And then look to make sure that you have guardrails in place, whether you're doing chargebacks or showbacks, or what we sometimes call shamebacks, right? And this is the case where, hey, Sonny's doing a good job of managing his cost. Sid, unfortunately, is not doing such a good job, right?
Yeah, that sounds about right, Sonny, for me. Not known for shutting down cloud resources when I should.
And the thing there, we do, all joking aside, we do chargebacks. That's kind of complicated. I don't want to say it's complicated. It involves accounting, right? I'm going to get with the accounting department, make sure that each department agrees to take on the budget, their fair share. That's a bigger lift than doing a showback where I actually just say, hey, marketing department, I want you to know this is the value you're getting out of this. Here's how much it's costing, but here's the value you're getting out of it. And then there is kind of the fun, what I would call having a little bit of fun with shamebacks. Who had the greatest improvement? That's another way to say that. Sid had a great improvement this quarter. He went from way underwater to way above water, right? But we don't want to use a stick here. We're always trying to be positive, so try to have some fun with that. But do put those guardrails in place so that you don't get that surprise bill. And I have been one of those who got the phone call, on a Monday morning at 8 a.m. from the CXO or the CIO saying, hey, Sonny, what the hell is going on, right? And me scratching my head, not knowing, right? That's a bad feeling. Like, what is going on? And then you're suddenly like, oh, we didn't shut down that service. Let me go talk to Sid again, right? I'd rather have the guardrails in place. And then the last thing is this goes to mindset. Think about the unit economics. Look, absolute numbers of your cost. They are important, but when you're driving value for your business, now you can start to say, hey, a new customer cost me this much. I can build that into my cost of service, all of those things. Or how much did it cost me to acquire a customer? So think about the unit economics about what you're doing, not just the hard number that like, hey, my bill is X and I need to decrease it by Y. You want to make sure that you're understanding, is the cost per transaction, the cost per customer, is that going down? So that's an important point there.
Fantastic. So why don't we take a look at what good looks like, and in terms of getting there, help our audience understand how they could get to a point where they feel like this is the kind of chart they're looking at.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Like, what does good look like? And I think it's a good place to start. So if I were looking 6, 8 months, a year down the road, what does good look like? Well, what that looks like is, if you typically think about a product, whether you're a product, building a product and deploy it to the market, or whether you're an enterprise, you have these distinct phases where I'm doing either transformation or I'm launching a product. And that's early on. And usually your unit costs are pretty high there, right? You haven't optimized your code. You haven't optimized your processes. You haven't figured out exactly how things work. And so early on, you tend to have higher unit cost. And then when you start to get a better fit in the market, you've optimized those processes. And that fit can be, I'm selling my product, I have a better product market fit, or my product is working better in my enterprise, right? This business unit is using it better and getting the most out of it. Then you start to see those KPIs associated with it, like sales or or efficiencies going up. And as they do, as your sales go up and you've optimized your cost, you start to see that blue line where your cost per transaction goes down. So even while this is what I was saying earlier, even while your overall spend may be going up, your cost per transaction is going down. And that's because you're offering greater service to the marketplace and you're generating more revenue, more bottom line profit. So that's kind of how I would look at that. I'll give you a couple of quick examples here. I can't take all the credit for this, but I had a great VP of engineering while I was at ThoughtSpot. And during that period, we doubled the number of customers that we had, but we were actually able to keep constant our data infrastructure spend. And what that meant was, in layman's terms, or another term is, we cut our cost per transaction in half, right? So we doubled the number of customers, but we did not increase our spend on infrastructure. So that's one way that what good looks like. Another might be, I'm kind of hypersensitive to this. I've been looking at what we're doing at Tifin AG for the last 3 months. And in the last 3 months, we've managed to cut our spend by something like 33% in just 3 months. And so I think there's more to come, but with a couple of these strategies that we're talking about, I think whether you're a data leader, you're a data engineer, a software engineer, you can have this sort of impact within your organization.
That's amazing, Sonny. And we're excited. We also have ThoughtSpot as one of our customers as well. So let's take a look. Let's dive into some fun things around actual strategies organizations can use for optimizing their data infrastructure costs. So let's kick it off with strategy number 1. Tell us a little bit about the monitoring and reporting. You've touched on it a little bit, but let's get into it a little bit more.
Yeah, so this goes to the visibility that we talked about early on, and it is the first phase. Any platform you have, again, AWS, GCP, I'm sure Hevo, I'm sure you guys have these sorts of visibility into your product operations, right?
We do.
You probably, if you can integrate them into a larger, more single pane of glass, is even better, right? So I can see how much is my data transformations and my data movement costing me, and how efficient are those? They may be very efficient. And then how much are my maybe data storage and warehousing? How much is that costing me? How much is my my analytics, or maybe my data science, all of those particular areas? But having visibility is the most important thing to get started, at least. Now, tools, and I'll use Snowflake as examples here, a good example. Tools like Snowflake have been getting better and better at showing us, proactively showing us what our spend is, what our usage is, our consumption, not necessarily dollars, but what's our consumption, and then also giving us trends of where we are going to be. So it's important to be able to look and see, hey, it's the 10th of the month, you're a third of the way through the month, but you look like you're going to be, at 150% of your budget, right? That may be okay. You may be killing it from a sales perspective, and that's great, and that's what you want. Or that could be a warning that says, hey, maybe we're over capacity here, or we're over provisioned. So having that visibility, mission critical. And then the next level is to kind of do it by business use case. And that's kind of what I was talking about before, whether it's a technical use case or whether it's a business use case for sales and marketing, or for shipping and logistics, or people analytics, whatever those cases are. But if you can tie it back to the business units, now you can start to begin to show back and think and say, oh, this particular business case is costing me X amount of money. Is that the right thing that I need to be spending those dollars on, or can I adjust? So visibility, first step, it's mission critical. And again, like I said, the watch out before, and I always listen to Donald Kuntz, who is the premier computer scientist, who basically said premature optimization is the root of all evil, right? So going at optimization first without looking at visibility, watch out for that.
There you go. Let's take a look at strategy number 2, warehouse consolidation.
You know, when we look at this sort of thing, I'll say that this kind of goes under that other step, right? Of when we start to talk about optimizing our processes, we start to say, are we doing these best practices? Are we deploying these things the right way? Are we optimizing our storage? So interesting here, within something like Snowflake, you can allocate resources, and those resources are typically compute resources. Hey, I can create warehouses for virtually as many people as I want, or as many services as I want. But is that the right thing to be doing? You may want to look at and say, how many warehouses do I have, or what's the utilization of each one of those warehouses? So having that in place to say, do I have 1,000 warehouses out there and each one of them has 1% utilization? I'm giving an extreme here, but I have seen that where organizations have said, oh, whenever we add a new user, we'll create a warehouse for them and spin it up just for them, and it's all isolated. Well, that can be costly, right? I can be running 1,000 warehouses all at 1% utilization and really be over provisioned by 100 times. So you might not want to do that. What you might want to do is say, hey, where can I consolidate those warehouses into groups and say, oh, this particular group has a warehouse to use, and as it scales up, maybe as the utilization goes past 70%, we'll scale out horizontally, right? So making sure you understand how to consolidate your resources, your warehouses, and then maybe scale out when needed is an important piece. That's one way to do that. The other thing that happens too is, you know, in the Snowflake world, it does speed up caching. It also helps you understand like workflows and managing workflows in a more, I don't want to say more granular level, because you would have, you know, literally thousands of warehouses, but managing your workflows by the use case, right? So warehouses by use case are a really good way to do that. So think about, am I allocating my resources, and, you know, do I have too many? Am I over provisioned? And can I consolidate these so that we have the right level of utilization within each one of those warehouses? The last thing I'll say is, if you're a Snowflake customer, probably if you're a Hevo customer, you could reach out to your account rep, your SE, and say, hey, can you give me stats on my utilization? And I did this at Snowflake. How do I get my stats by utilization? And they would say, hey, here are the 10 warehouses that are overutilized a lot, that, you know, that are maybe overused, and you probably either need to size up or scale out, but you've got to do work here. Here's 50 warehouses that are rarely used and could be consolidated into one. So, you know, use your vendor to help you solve some of those issues.
Absolutely. Great insight. So let's take a look at number 3, some best practices our audience can leverage for compute and storage.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting chart, and you should all recognize this, that one, right sizing your compute is really, really important. So I talked about consolidating warehouses earlier, but right sizing that compute for the workload really matters. And so if you look at this diagram, what you could see, well, let's just take the first bar on the left. I'm doing my job. It literally takes me 13 minutes to do it, but I could do it in half the time, right? 6.5 minutes at the same cost, because, you know, in the Snowflake world, I could double the size of my warehouse, doubles the cost, right? But I do it in half the amount of time. So that means I just got the same amount of work done in less time. So that's a good thing. Now, if you're like Sid didn't have auto scaling turned off, or he didn't auto shut down that service, and it just kept running. So he's running it all the time. Well, he doubled his cost. That's all Sid did. So important to
Don't
know
be
that
like Sid. The
that's
rule, don't be like Sid.
that's a new meme right there. Don't be like
Hmm.
no, but it's all joking aside, right? It's important to know, like, yes, you doubled the size of it, but you should probably know to have auto shutdown on and auto suspend
Hmm.
in Snowflake. Or if you're manually doing it, I would manually shut it down. But usually auto suspend is the way to go. So, now I've cut that in half. Well, I could keep doing that. What if I needed to, get it done in 3 minutes? Well, I could double that and the cost stays the same. And I could, again, double again, double again. But there is a point of diminishing return. And I think some people might not recognize this. So at some point, I can start using more and more resources, and in this case, Snowflake, over provision. And now my cost actually goes up, right? Because I'm over provisioned. Yes, it gets done, but you can see it gets done a little bit faster, but not much, not twice as much, and I'm paying twice as much. So you need to be aware that that piece is out there. And this can happen in any sort of processing. Again, AWS, GCP, Snowflake, whatever else. Make sure that you understand where that break-even point is, where your performance is. And this will tie all the way back to that very first slide of having the visibility and the monitoring and the details into how's this process performing. So that's what I would look at here. There's a number of best practices here. First of all, in Snowflake, auto suspend, right? What's important to note is the most efficient use of a resource is not to actually use it at all, right? My car gets 50 miles to the gallon. That's still not as good as if I went for a walk, right? It's still not as
Hmm.
good as if I didn't drive it, right? So, but that doesn't get us anywhere. We still need to do compute. So when I'm not using something, we should be shutting it down or putting it into a state where it's not costing us dollars. So auto suspend is great. The other one is multi-clustering in Snowflake, where we set the parameters to say, hey, if I'm going over a certain queue length or a certain wait time, now we'll start spinning up additional resources and processing that queue. And then when that resource demand goes down, right, we will go back down to the minimum number of warehouses in our cluster that we want. A great example here is that Monday morning analytics that happens. Everyone jumps on at 9 a.m. or 8:30. They start looking at their daily reports and their KPIs from last week. So I have all of my users hitting my system at 9 a.m. I want to maintain my SLA, so I let it scale out. And then by 10 o'clock, it scales back to normal. And then I just run that way for the rest of the week and have some periodic scale up and scale down. So I would
Excellent.
do that. The last thing I would say from a storage perspective, storage is pretty cheap, but it is not totally inexpensive. So do monitor your storage. You can see if you're copying a lot of data over and over again, and maybe you've seen this, Sid. I've seen customers that are doing full loads all the time, and they just actually making
Hmm.
copies over and over. So
Exactly.
not only are they processing the full load, they're saving that same data over and over again. And that can get expensive after a while.
Absolutely. So let's look at the fourth strategy. And I think this is in the strategy for don't be like Sid. We're talking about budgets, baselines, and guardrails, which I certainly need guardrails myself. Help us out here, Sonny.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Snowflake and again, lots of tools have these. I'm using Snowflake as an example. They're a really good example because they're really great in the marketplace. And I know Hevo works really well with Snowflake. So another good reason for me to be talking about it. Not to mention I'm a data superhero here. So, but I will say early on, Snowflake didn't have these capabilities. And that's kind of what got me started was they didn't have these capabilities and had these unexpected spends coming up. And so the first thing Snowflake did was added resource monitors, but they were just inadequate for what we were doing, right? And as you grow in scale, a resource monitor that just says you can only use this much of a resource and we're going to shut you down at a certain percentage. That was the bare minimum. But what we started to see was I need to be able to budget. I needed to be able to say, hey, it's okay for Sid to spend X number of credits per week or per month on these resources. And he can use all he wants. I'm not worried about that. While at the same time, another group could have a different budget, could be more, could be less, and I can manage each one of those separately. So that's really, really important to, one, have the guardrails. Yes, I need to be able to say, Sid, you're trending at 150% over, and at 110%, I'm going to actually stop the service. So either you're going to do something about it, or I'm going to stop the service. Or you could come back and say, Sid, and like Sid normally would do, is he would come back and say, Sonny, we are killing it on sales. I've got all of these new customers. Now, I just need a bigger budget here, because look at my unit costs. My unit costs are going down. My sales are going up, but we hadn't reallocated our budget. Let's fix that budget. Sure, Sid, keep the sales coming, and we're going to, up that budget, right? So
Yep.
I think having resource monitors, guardrails in place are critical. Budgeting is important too, because not every business unit is the same. Some are revenue generating, and so they may have a little more flexibility. Others tend to be fixed cost, right? And you want to keep a tighter controls on those. I came out of the financial services space. Unfortunately, compliance doesn't generate revenue, but it's a must-have, right? It's in this crazy category of, you have to have really good compliance in the finance space, or in the financial services space. But it doesn't do a lot to generate a lot of revenue for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you want to make sure that you're not going crazy in that space, but you want to make sure that you have it. So mission critical for, and I would say this is what you are looking at when you get to the next level. Maybe it's strategy 4. It's probably level 3 of your FinOps program, if you will.
Okay.
Right. Now, with that said, I'll give one caveat. Guardrails are at level 0, right? That's the very first thing to do. Put a number out
Darn
there.
it.
Put a number out there, and if you go over it, if you're getting close to it, have a hard number, a hard guardrail early on. Don't wait until you get a big bill to say, oh, I should have had that guardrail.
Fantastic. And let's look at number 5, where you can take advantage of committed spends with your vendor. Help our audience understand when they should take advantage of that strategy. Yeah,
so it's interesting. Committed spends, they come in various forms from different providers and different vendors. Again, think of AWS. If you tell AWS, I'm going to spend X number of dollars with you every year, guaranteed, they're going to give you a lower cost per unit, per amount of EC2 instances or CPU that you're running. Snowflake does a similar thing. Hey, you're going to commit to X amount of spend. Your compute costs are going to go down, because, just simple economics, $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow, or 3 months from now, or 6 months from now. So you much rather have that committed spend. And they like it because it guarantees revenue. You like it because it gives you predictive spends and predictive cost, right? So that's what's important. So that's why committed spends are out there. So what are they? What do you need to know? If you look at that first line, your cost is really like the rate to use that service and how much usage. So how many dollars per minute or per second or per hour, and then how many of those units, minutes, seconds, hours did you use? Multiply those together and you'll get your cost, right? When you start to do, an on-demand price, in this example, you see an on-demand price of cost me 20 cents approximately. I can use it whenever I want. I don't have a committed spend. Just cost me 20 cents. I use it for 12 days or so, or 12 hours, whatever this is. Oh, this is 12 months. I use it for 12 months, and there's 750 hours in a month, right? That's what it's going to cost me. But if I were to do a committed spend, I'll push that number down. And in this case, I'm pushing that number down by 8 cents per unit. What is 8 cents per unit? It's roughly a third, close to a third. So oh, there you go, 37%. I can do math, Sid.
There you go.
So I got a 37% discount. Well, some of these committed spends can be as much as 60%. Maybe not on Snowflake, but on your AWS providers, your GCP providers, things of that nature. So your committed spends can decrease your cost a lot. What's the watch out? What's the downside of this, right? Why don't I just get a 37% discount all the time? Well, it's not committed, so that's one reason you don't get it. But that's the downside is too, as a data leader, you have to recognize I'm going to pay for this service for that committed spend, whether I use it or not. And so if you suddenly say 3 months into this, oh, I don't need that anymore, you've made a committed spend, it's going to cost you that, right? Or you need to find something else to use that. So I would say be careful when you commit and make sure that you actually need it. And what's important for the data leader that's making decisions about budgeting and how they're what they want to spend on and what they want to what kind of committed spends they make. It's important for them to know, but it's important for software developers and architects to know, hey, if I'm going to run this service 24/7, I'm going to run this thing all the time. I want to help my company. It actually helps me because the more profitable we are, the more profitable I am. So I know that I'm going to run this service 24/7. If I do a committed spend, let my the right people know, and we can cut the cost of that particular service. So, but just make sure you understand what it is and what kind of discount you're going to get.
Fantastic. So those are the 5 strategies. Great insight, Sonny. Let me take just a quick moment to talk a little bit about what we're calling ELT or data integration cost-saving techniques. We'll talk about those quickly, and then we'll open up for Q&A. So when we talk about ELT infrastructure, data integration infrastructure, you want to optimize the data frequency in which you load your data. You want to make sure that aligns with your business goals. You also want to make sure, as Sonny referenced earlier, you don't want to keep a bunch of copies of the same data. You want to be able to load the data one time and then capture changes to that data. So you're only moving data from an incremental perspective. There are features like change data capture that help with that. On top of that, you want to dedupe the data. You want to compress it. You want to maximize the efficiency of the load process. You can do that through some pre-processing and filtering. You could perhaps run your pipelines that move the data on off-peak hours to help with your infrastructure costs. And then really dig into the monitoring capabilities of the underlying platform. Make sure that you understand what scaling capabilities you have. Do these pipelines scale to meet volumes? What if you did have a surge in data volume that you weren't expecting? Make sure you're able to enable data spike monitoring that will give you a headwind or give you some insight into an unexpected amount of data that's coming through the system. So fully utilize the alerting and monitoring systems to basically help you manage your infrastructure costs. Now, when you're talking about Hevo in specific, we can really dial exactly the frequency in which you ingest and load data. We can do it at any interval from a batch interval all the way to real-time analytics using streaming data integration. We are able to efficiently manage and monitor the resources. We can scale up and scale down pipelines automatically. And one thing that we really offer is a complete transparency cost management system. There will be no surprises. You'll know exactly how much data is moving through the system from a consumption basis. And then we have features in the product around automation and change data capture that allow you to be as efficient as possible when you're processing the data. And with that said, I think we're pretty much ready for some questions, and then we'll just leave it on this slide with how to reach you, Sonny. You want to offer that up first before we take some questions?
I am going to ask you to do something, and I'm going to go off the rails here a little bit. Can you back up 2 slides?
Going rogue.
Going rogue on you. So one more slide. I think it's interesting. I was watching you and listening to the things that you said, and I was in my mind saying, where do these fit into those 4 strategies that I was laying out? And I looked at optimization of where am I using my storage properly and where am I, managing my compute. And each one of these things fell nicely into one of those categories. So that made me feel pretty good. I see monitor and auto scaling, right? And I saw, having enabled data spike monitoring. That's that visibility that we talked about, having alerting in your system. So all of these things, I felt pretty good seeing these things like, yes, those fall into the same strategies that you were talking about. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but it did make me feel like we were on the same page and we were doing the right things.
Yeah, feels darn good to me.
Yep.
All right. I think we're ready for some questions. You want to give everyone some insight on how to reach you, and then we'll take some questions?
Yeah. So yeah, please reach out to me. Here's a QR code for me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect. Here's how you can reach me at my work. If you follow me on LinkedIn, I do a lot of posting in that space. If you notice, if you go to that, you'll see next week I'll actually be in London. I'll be at Big Data London talking about data and AI products. So I'm excited to go back there. It's my 3rd year in a row at Big Data London. It's one of the biggest data conferences in the UK. Super excited about being there. And of course, I'm publishing stuff on LinkedIn, and I'm usually publishing something at Tifin AG around data and AI.
Fantastic, Sonny. Thank you. My QR code is here as well if you'd like to connect, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about Hevo Data. Radhika, I simply can't see the questions. If you could prompt us with the questions, we'll be glad to answer those for the audience.
Sure, Sid. So we have one question that says, in strategy 3, is there any way to find the break-even point for finding the best efficient warehouse for a particular query?
Yeah, and I'll take that. So the nice thing is, by the way, I can see these questions, so that's really good.
Fantastic.
This is actually a really good question, and it's not always easy. There's a couple of things you can do, right? There's always the logging. You can log and see how long things take. But within Snowflake, there's kind of a query history, and it gives you the profile. And within that profile, so run your queries. If it's a long-running query, run it. Take a look at it and it'll take you through each node of the query, because the query is broken down into separate work paths. It'll take you through each node and say, this node is costing you a lot. And that node could be something like, hey, it's pulling a lot of data from this particular table where maybe there's a bad cluster ID or something to that effect. It's pulling a lot of data, having to do a full table scan. You can start to see, okay, well, if I had a bigger warehouse, would that help me? Well, maybe it would, because you're spilling data off to disk. Like I'm reading in billions of millions of rows in, just like you do at home. If you're using more memory than your computer does, it starts swapping data out. Well, Snowflake will do the same thing. So look at each node, definitely look for spilling over, and that will tell you like, hey, I'm writing to disk, I'm doing swapping. And then you can get a feel for, hey, would a bigger warehouse help me? And I think it's important to note the difference between I need a bigger warehouse, in other words, go up, I need more memory, I need more CPU, versus I need to support more users, right? I got a bunch of people coming on, and they're all running small queries, right? So that's what I would say. Look at the profiler, and it will give you a really good idea. There's nothing better than really running those and running them at different times, clearing your cache, running the queries at different times, and you'll see that curve. I mean, literally, that's what I did there. Just run the same query at those curves, and you'll see it start to flatten out.
Great. Thanks, Sonny. What's our next question?
Helpful.
Yes.
Very helpful.
Yep. Thank you so much, Sunny. So the next question is, what do you think about including compliance as a part of risk mitigation and budgeting for that, for it in that area?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it's a good strategy. It'll depend on the the type of organization that you are in. I do think I tend to fall into the category of, maybe you justify these a number of ways. And one of the things I often talk about is you can pay me now, or you can pay me 10 times later, right? And so making sure that they understand the cost of being out of compliance, right? And, what's the cost of being out of compliance and what's the risk of being out of compliance? And so, meaning what's the probability that this event is actually going to occur, and then how much would it cost me, right? You can multiply those two numbers together and you'll get a number and say, am I willing to bet that much money, or would I rather invest a much smaller amount to make sure that that event doesn't happen? That's kind of how I would look at that, but it definitely depends on your organization.
Great. Going on to the next one. How does CDC work in your tool, which is Hevo, to operational data stores like RDS, where changes happen frequently, but there's no native notification always built into our RDBMS?
That's a broad question. I'll try to answer it as best I can. Typically, databases have an underlying logging structure. So if you're in an Oracle database, you have redo logs. If you have a Postgres database, you have the WAL files that are being created. And often these underlying structures are designed for recovery for the database, but they also can be leveraged to capture changes that are occurring in the database. So for change data capture, it's typically log-based. It typically means that we're able to read in the logs, and as a record's inserted, we get that inserted record from the log. We get an update, we get a delete, and we simply keep that source system in synchronization with the target system. If for some reason those logging structures aren't in place, there are other methods that can be taken into consideration. You can use date and timestamps for some of your queries to pull whatever's changed in a certain time window. So there's several different approaches that we take at Hevo Data to facilitate change data capture and to ensure that the loading process is as efficient as possible.
Awesome. Going on to the next question. What are some common problems organizations run into when trying to set up FinOps practices in order to manage their cloud costs?
So the first and foremost is they don't necessarily have executive buy-in and stakeholder leadership buy-in. So I would say before you start your program, make sure that you get leadership on board with it. That's first and foremost of almost every program. I think the next thing is make sure if you look at those things I laid out, getting visibility into what your actual costs are is first and foremost. So don't get caught in the trap of, hey, something seems slow or something seems high. Let me go start optimizing code somewhere. I would definitely get the visibility in there and then start to say, where am I going to get the most bang for my buck? And maybe keys to success, go for those low-hanging fruit things and hit those early. And when you have those quick wins and you win early, then you'll get their leadership to let you do even more, right? So making sure, like, do I have warehouses that are over provisioned? Am I using too much storage? Am I saving all of this data where I don't need to be? Am I processing, as Sid talked about, am I doing full loads every time when I could be doing incremental loads? There's some things you could do, low-hanging fruit, low impact, low risk, that have a big return. Those quick wins will help you. And then you can turn that into, oh, you know what? I actually want to buy this observation tool that's going to save us even more. Or I want to use this additional tool or service. So that's one of the things I would look at. I kind of phrase this more as like things to do to be successful, as opposed to like these are problems, I think. So maybe, I hope I answered the question. Hopefully.
I believe you did.
The next question is, why does scheduling pipelines on off-peak hours help? I would imagine from an efficiency standpoint, it is marginally better to pack things tightly.
It really depends on the underlying infrastructure. There are times that at peak hours, you're going to be paying more for utilizing that infrastructure. So if you are able to leverage off-peak hours for managing your pipelines, then there may be some cost savings for you. It all depends on the underlying infrastructure and cost structure that's in place for you.
Great. Going on to the next one. How have companies effectively reduced their ELT costs through the use of CDC and other optimization techniques?
Well, as I was saying earlier, if you're going to refresh your data by doing a full load of millions of data, then you're going to take, hours of time to do those loads. A lot of organizations that leverage Hevo Data do a one-time load of that massive volume, that historical data that is the underlying data for the source system, and then they simply turn on our change data capture after that and trickle feed the data in. And as fast as that data can be trickle feed or fed into the pipeline, we will process that into the downstream destination, let's say Snowflake, for example. And what that does is not only is it more efficient, but it provides that business insight. It gives the end user, it gives the business insight into that information so that when they're making business decisions, they're making it on the most relevant data. If you're doing a once a day refresh of the entire historical load, then the business users are only as fresh as that one day, as opposed to being in near real time able to make better decisions. So it does add to not only the infrastructure efficiency, but the overall efficiency of the business itself to make sound decisions on the right data.
Amazing. So we have another question. When do you have to recommend to enable QAS versus increasing the warehouse size or increasing the number of clusters?
Is this question for me or is this question for you, Sid?
I think it's you, Sonny.
Okay. Oh, sorry, QAS. I think what he's saying, query acceleration. So I didn't know that. I was trying to figure out what that
I didn't
acronym
either. Glad you grabbed that one.
Yeah, so I'm sitting here going QAS. Okay, so when do you recommend QAS versus increasing the warehouse size or increasing? So let's first take size of the warehouse versus scaling out the number of warehouses in the cluster. First of all, size really is really around performance of maybe an individual query or a workload. So if a workload is too big for a warehouse, so let's say you use an extra small warehouse in Snowflake, but I'm just going to query billions of rows, right? Having more extra small warehouses is, from a multi-cluster perspective, isn't going to help me, right? It's not going to spread the load over that. I'm just going to have one of these that's working really hard, spilling data over, and so that doesn't help me. What I really need to do is understand how big is that workload, and do I need more memory and more CPU to handle that? Versus from a multi-cluster perspective, how many concurrent users do I have? I've got a lot of SIDs running small to medium-sized workloads, and they fit nicely inside of the existing warehouse size. Those are your typical two problems, right? Then QAS came in, or query acceleration came in when occasionally I would get this large workload in, and I just needed to scale up for a little bit for that one occasional job, and then I can scale back down. And that's when the QAS or the query acceleration piece, and what they're doing there too is, like, Snowflake has a couple of different acronyms or ideas here. Query acceleration, they also have indexes, right? Snowflake first came out and said, we don't really do indexes. Then they came out with, hey, we have these indexes. That's effectively what they are. They're for fast lookups of individual rows. So if I know Sid's unique identifier, I'll have an index and I can look him up really quickly. So you can start to look at, hey, do I need that index to help look them up? Does that hopefully that answers your question. So.
Awesome. Going on to the next one, could you talk about some differences between AWS Glue and the Hevo ETL tool?
Could you repeat that, Radhika?
Yeah. So, could you talk about some differences between AWS Glue and the Hevo ETL tool?
Okay, absolutely. So AWS Glue is it's an integration platform as well as a catalog for your AWS environment. The way I differentiate that is that while that is a fantastic tool for what it does, Hevo plays a more neutral role in the market in that we span any kind of source or target in your environment. So we're able to build pipelines across any environment that you may have, whether that is AWS or GCP or Azure, whether you're writing to a Redshift or a Snowflake. So we are sort of the Swiss Army knife of being able to integrate data across on-premise systems to cloud systems. And it gives you that full diversity, that full breadth of heterogeneous sources and targets to allow you to do that. That's what really makes Hevo stand out as an integration platform.
Awesome. You mentioned about underutilization of warehouses and overutilization. Does Snowflake provide this out of the box, or should we reach out to our AEs to get info on this?
So I think you can now get this out of the box. It's definitely in public preview. It may be in GA, but you should look. So, when I talked about Snowflake changed and added new resources for budgets and added new services for budgeting and resource monitors, this is one of the things that they added, which was warehouse utilization reporting. So I think you can get that natively in Snowflake today. If it's not GA, it's in public preview, which is essentially beta, right? So you should be able to access that today. But I wouldn't be afraid to reach out to my Snowflake support team and say, hey, I need this, point me in the right direction. And by the way, there's a good community. I think Hevo has a good community. Snowflake has a good community. You can post your question there and someone will point you to whether it's public preview or GA.
Awesome. So I think the last question is, how much cost adds when we choose Hevo?
How much, pardon me, Radhika, what was that again? How much
cost adds when we choose Hevo?
How much cost adds when we choose Hevo? Is that the question? I apologize. My earbuds aren't working.
Yep, that's the question, that how much cost we would add if people tend to choose Hevo.
Well, that's a difficult question to answer definitively, but Hevo is a very economical platform. We're designed to be economical. All of the things I described to you earlier in this webinar regarding the ways that we utilize our resources, the way that we automate, we auto scale, we provide those automations around change data capture. We certainly are a vendor product that you do have to, pay to use us, but we're designed to be as efficient and as cost effective as literally any of the ELT products in the market. So I'll leave it with that.
Awesome. I've also posted Hevo's pricing page for the reference, so you can have a look. Great.
Awesome.
I think we are done with questions here. We can wait for a minute and see if more questions pop up.
I've done a lot of webinars. I've never seen them get through all of the questions. That was amazing, actually, right? To see all of these questions come up. So many times it comes to, you don't have enough time to answer all these questions and you have to get back to them offline. It's amazing that we got to all of those questions there.
That is.
Just goes to show you how efficient Sid really is, even though I had a little fun at his expense. Thank you, Sid.
Well, I don't know that it was inaccurate, Sonny. Just ask my DevOps team.
Well, while we have a minute, I don't see any questions. Definitely do follow us. I follow Sid. if you want to know more about Snowflake, if you want to know more about Tifin AG, please reach out to me and then follow me and see how things go in London. So that should be exciting.
Good.